Generally speaking, one of the hardest things to build for in Dungeons & Dragons are taunt or tank-style characters that can pull enemies away from your allies and instead try and get them to attack you. Though that's never stopped Colby from making a bunch of very fun, effective, and creative attempts at it. The obvious reason for this is that enemies are controlled by a human, so barring some effect or environmental feature that forces them to attack you, it's famously tricky to pull this off. That is, until now. The Path of the World Tree Barbarian, along with some other dips, has the very unique ability to consistently pull enemies towards us, slow their speed, and combine to make for a spinning vortex of doom that is sure to satisfy those of you who have been looking to play a true taunt character in D&D 5e. This build was heavily inspired by growing up in the 90s and playing the original Mortal Kombat and hearing Scorpion yell. So in my headcanon, this is the Scorpion Barb. But we're not going to waste any more time though, let's just jump into the build. I should also clarify that this build is exclusively using 2024 content. I really want to give a huge shout out to D&D Unoptimized, Exploring the Build, and Forward Stonebreaker, all on my Discord server, for really helping me iron out some of the kinks with this build. I could not have done it without you guys. So if you want to go support them and drop a sub to their channels, I will leave a link in the pinned comment below. Thank you all so much. I am also less than 200 subscribers away from hitting the incredible milestone of 10,000, so if you haven't subbed already and would like to help me out on this quest, I would really appreciate it. Thanks. Beginning with our species, there was a couple of choices, but I ultimately settled on the Goliath, specifically with the Frost Giant ancestry for a few reasons. Firstly, Goliath gives us the most move speed, which can be useful in the event that we need to catch something or intercept an enemy on the way to one of our allies. But that should very rarely, if ever, be happening. More importantly, we picked the Frost Giant ancestry because it allows us, when we hit a target with an attack and deal damage to it, to not only get to deal an extra 1d6 cold damage, but we can also reduce its speed by 10 feet until the start of our next turn. This will be important for the build. We get to use this ability a proficiency bonus amount of times per day, so admittedly, yeah, it is a fairly limited resource, but at least it does scale with us and can prove to be very useful in the right moment. Hill Giant Ancestry was another consideration since it is a guaranteed prone effect, but we should be able to get this off reliably eventually anyway. Lastly, Stone Giant and Storm Giant both seemed like strong contenders, and especially for a tank build, but it's very likely that our reaction is going to be tied up on a lot of rounds, so these don't quite work out. Goliath also gives us large form, which once per long rest lets us increase our size to large, giving us advantage on strength checks, but also increasing our speed by an additional 10 feet. So for 10 minutes, we can have our base speed be 45, which is pretty massive considering we haven't even picked a class yet. For ability scores, in case you don't know, they are no longer tied to your species, but they're instead tied to your background. And now for this build, we are going to be choosing the farmer background. It might seem like an odd choice, but the reason that we're picking it is because of the origin feat that it provides. Also, for those that don't know as well, all backgrounds now provide an origin feat, which are just a few feats that are a little bit more basic and don't offer ability score improvements. Most of them are quite good and some are a bit situational. We're going to be picking farmer because it provides the tough origin feat. This gives us 2 hit points at each level, and hit points are going to be important for our character since we are a taunt and a tank. It is quite likely that we are going to be taking a non-zero amount of damage, so bulking up on HP at the start is a good way to keep us alive. Anyway, back to ability scores, we are going to be using the point buy method and dropping a 15 in strength, a 14 in dexterity, 13 in constitution, and a 13 in wisdom because of a multi-class dip that we're going to be picking up later on. Needing to have that 13 in wisdom does leave our constitution a bit lower than I would have liked to have it, especially for a tank, but I think we're going to be okay because of some of the other options that we're going to be picking up later on. Then our farmer background lets us adjust our strength, constitution, and wisdom. We can put a +1 into each or a +2 into one and a +1 into another. That's what we're going to be doing, so we're going to put a +2 into our strength, so it's sitting at 17, and a +1 to our constitution to bring it up to 14. Finally, as for our equipment, we're going to be using the gold method. Each background offers 50 gold to start with, so we can easily afford a halberd and a maul, so we're going to be picking up both. Starting as a barbarian, we also get 75 gold, which easily lets us afford either scale mail or a chain shirt. We're going to pick up scale mail here. Sure, disadvantage on stealth kind of sucks, but being a tank, every bit of AC counts. So with that, our AC is now sitting at 16. So at first level, we're jumping straight into Barbarian. Now we are going to be dipping Fighter later on, and the typical rule of thumb is that if you're going to dip Fighter, you might as well do it right away. But honestly, we don't need to. We don't really care about proficiency and con saves for this build, and the extra mastery is completely inconsequential to us. I mean, we are going to be swimming in weapon masteries by the end of this. The fighting style that it adds is also such a small asset that we can afford to wait. It's much more important for us to get the build up and running before we start dipping elsewhere. We also get 2 skill proficiency, so we're going to grab athletics and intimidation because they feel appropriate, even though our charisma mod is kind of in the gutter. Next, at first level, we also get rage, which if you don't know has changed a little bit from 2014. We can still use it a limited number of times, which does increase as we level up. However, now we get to recover 1 use of it after a short rest, which is a nice little bump. We still have resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage, which is going to be massively beneficial in our role as a tank. Most of the damage in this game comes from one of these 3 sources, so being able to cut that in half just right away off the top is a big deal. Rage now also lasts for 10 minutes instead of 1, but it's also worth mentioning that sustaining it is no longer reliant on dealing or taking damage. You can now extend your rage by making an attack roll against an enemy. You don't actually even need to hit them, forcing an enemy to make a saving throw, or by just using your bonus action to extend your rage. For us, the difference isn't likely to be all that impactful, so we can pretty much guarantee that every turn we are going to be attacking. Unarmored defense is still a thing. It sets our AC to be 10 plus our dexterity and con mods, but scale mail is just going to be better for us, so we're going to stick with that. And once we get to a point where we can afford half plate, I'd switch over to that too. Finally, at first level, we also get Weapon Mastery, which is a new system for martial characters to engage with that grants additional effects on our weapon attacks. As a barbarian, we get to start with 2, so we're going to be picking the halberd for cleave and maul for topple. Cleave lets us, when we hit a creature using our halberd, to make another attack against another enemy within 5 feet of the original target that's also within our reach. Given that we plan to be around as many enemies as possible, as often as possible, this is going to be perfect for us. Topple also allows us to knock a creature prone on a failed Constitution saving throw. Here's the thing though, what I really wanted to pick up here was the slow mastery. In a perfect world, we're going to be having 2 or 3 enemies around us at any given time, and we want to keep them there, and slow would have been a very easy way to do that. The problem is that slow is only available on clubs, javelins, light crossbows, slings, whips, longbows, and muskets. None of these are all that relevant for us. Most are ranged weapons or light weapons that aren't going to synergize well with the rest of our build. Fortunately, we will have a few different ways of essentially being able to get slow effects, like from our Frost Giant ancestry and a few others, so we aren't all that dependent on getting the slow mastery, thankfully. Topple as well, for our purposes, functions as something of a pseudo-slow effect, assuming it goes off. If the target goes prone, they're not going to be going anywhere particularly quickly. The downside is that it is reliant on an enemy failing a save, but we will have to put up with that for a few levels. At second level, we are sticking with Barbarian, and here we get Danger Sense, which provides us with advantage on dexterity saving throws, provided that we aren't incapacitated. This is a really nice thing to have, and it's now even nicer than it used to be, because it doesn't have the old stipulation of needing to see the effect. That always raised some questions, so the fact that it's gone just makes this more reliable. This was a great change. Also at second level, we get Reckless Attack. So now, when we make our first attack, we get to decide if we want to attack recklessly or not. If we do, all of our attack rolls until the start of our next turn are made with advantage, but all enemy attack rolls against us are also made with advantage. This is fine for us, we shouldn't be all that worried about it. More importantly though, this feature is now symmetrical in that our advantage lasts until the start of our next turn, rather than ending after the current one, so it does work with opportunity attacks, which is a great change. We are going to be attacking recklessly at every chance that we get. Now, at third level, we are sticking with Barbarian and get access to the new Primal Knowledge feature, which gives us a great use for our rage while we are outside of combat. On top of giving us an extra proficiency, it allows us while raging to make acrobatics, intimidation, perception, stealth, or survival checks using our strength modifier instead of the typical one associated with it. This is admittedly very cool, but at least slightly confusing. I'm not entirely sure how it can be so angry that I'm suddenly stealthy, but here we are. Jokes aside, I know they've explained this away by equating rage to some mystical, near magical power that channels and courses through your body by granting these powers, but I still just love the visual of someone just incredibly aggressively surveying a field in front of them. At level 3, we also get our subclass option, and this is where the fun really begins. We are choosing the Path of the World Tree, the brand new subclass for 2024. The first feature that we get for it is Vitality of the Tree. With it, when we rage, we gain a number of temporary hit points equal to our Barbarian level, so at this point we are only getting 3, but every hit point counts, right? I guess. It's not a lot, but it's better than nothing. But better than that though, is that it also gives us life-giving force, which lets us, while our rage is active, and at the start of our turn, to choose another creature within 10 feet of them, and give them temporary hit points equal to a roll of d6s equal to our rage damage bonus. That's kind of a weird sentence. So what it means is that at level 3, our rage damage bonus is +2, so we'd roll 2d6 to determine the temp HP. 10 feet can be a little bit tight, but there might be some circumstances where we can make this work. At level 4 and level 4 in Barbarian, we are getting another weapon mastery, and honestly, this one is kind of inconsequential. I'm going to go with clubs for slow, but again, this is pretty unlikely that we're ever going to need to use this with the build, unless we're in a particularly dire or niche situation. Also at level 4, we get our first feat, and we are going to be taking the Slasher feat. It lets us bump up our strength or dexterity by 1, so we will move our strength up to 18, so we get that sweet +4. More importantly though, it also gives us Hamstring, which lets us, once per turn when we hit a creature with a weapon that deals slashing damage, to reduce their speed by 10 feet until the start of their next turn. This is kind of like a pseudo-slow mastery that we get to apply, say in the event that our topple mastery doesn't trigger if our target makes their save. Yeah, I mean it's only once per turn, but this will come in handy since it can trigger on top of any other effects we apply, as well as on any attack of our choice, and we're probably going to be making quite a lot of attacks too. It also gives us Enhanced Critical, which makes it so if we score a critical hit on the creature, that it has disadvantage on attack rolls until the start of our next turn. Nice. This can be useful in the event that it attacks us or if they are a ranged combatant and try to attack one of our allies. Granted, we can never guarantee a crit, but at least at this stage we're always recklessly attacking, so our chances at least slightly improved. At 5th level in Barbarian, we get 2 more features, Extra Attack and Fast Movement. Extra Attack is great for obvious reasons, and Fast Movement effectively gives us a base movement speed of 45 now, or 55 when in large form. Basically nothing is getting away from us at this point. Finally, 6th level. This is the one that we've been waiting for. This is the feature that really lets this build come together. Branches of the Tree. With this feature, whenever we are raging and a creature we can see starts its turn within 30 feet of us, we can use our reaction to summon the spectral branches of the World Tree. When we do this, the target needs to succeed on a strength saving throw or be teleported to a spot within 5 feet of us, and their speed becomes 0 until the end of the current turn. Alright, so there is a lot to unpack here. Branches of the Tree is the reason we will almost never have our reaction available to us. We are likely going to be trying to activate this feature whenever possible, and depending on how initiative falls, we could get the chance to use this twice in very quick succession since reactions come back at the start of our own turn. This means that we're almost never going to be making opportunity attacks, which is unfortunate, but ultimately is going to be worth it. Next, we gotta remember that this teleports the creature to us, and not us to them. This is a very big deal. One of the common faults with a lot of taunt builds is that for as much as you do, the enemy can often still just attack your ally. But pulling them away from our team and into us not only makes it more likely that they will attack us since we're the ones messing with them, but it also helps to keep our allies safe. And if they're a ranged attacker, even if they still decide to target an ally, well, now they have disadvantage on that attack since we are within 5 feet of them and they can't even move away since their speed is 0 until their turn ends. Setting their speed to 0 is the icing on the cake here. Not only do we pull them into us, but they are stuck there, which gives us ample opportunities to keep them there. And yeah, it's tied to a saving throw, but even at this point, its DC is 15, which isn't too bad, and strength saves tend to be fairly reliable, so I don't expect that we'll have all that much trouble getting this off, but it obviously is not going to work every single time. Now that we've got that all figured out, let's follow in Colby's footsteps and do our first damage report. This is going to be slightly tricky since we can never guarantee that there's going to be 2 creatures within our reach at any given point, but I am going to perform the calculations with that assumption. So yeah, this is kind of best case scenario, but I don't really think it's all that unrealistic either. We have insane amounts of movement to get in range of basically anything, so even if branches only successfully triggers once, we've got our 2 enemies. So just keep that in mind during these calculations. So what does combat look like for us at this stage? Our goal is to get within range of an enemy as soon as possible. Remember that we're also using a halberd, which is a reach weapon, so having 10 feet of range combined with 45 feet of movement should make this a fairly easy task to accomplish. Then, at the start of another creature's turn, we are going to hopefully successfully pull them in toward us and keep them there since their speed is now 0. We will also be conveniently placing them right next to the other enemy. And if there's no other enemies to pull, we can also pull an ally if needed, and this would also allow us to give them some extra temporary hit points through Vitality of the Tree. We're then going to use our action to attack one of the enemies recklessly. A successful hit will also allow us to proc our Cleave Mastery on our halberd, which also doesn't allow us to add our Strength modifier, but says nothing of other modifiers, so we would get a rage damage bonus on the second attack too. On either of these 2 hits, we can also choose to use our Slasher feat to subsequently slow them down and limit their escape options. Or we can also use the slow from our Frost Giant ancestry, which also adds 1d6 cold damage and slows them by 10 feet. Or we can do both and apply 1 to each creature or the same to both of them. On our extra attack, we can still use our halberd if we want to, but it isn't necessary since cleave can only activate once per turn. Instead, we can go ahead and switch over to our maul and try to get a topple to further restrict the enemy's options from escaping. So you're probably starting to see how this is all coming together. We can easily close the gap on most of our enemies. We can then pull them towards us using branches of the tree and then attack them and restrict their escape options, and it only gets better from here. With all that said, we are now dealing an average of 36 DPR against an AC of 10 and an average of 27 DPR against an AC of 15. Admittedly, it's nothing much to write home about, but it is quite respectable, and also worth remembering that damage is not the core function of our character. It's battlefield control and tanking. Also, it's likely that this number will be slightly higher since we will always be using reckless attack, but these numbers are for normal straight rolls. With advantage, if you're curious, it would be 40 and 36. Moving on to level 7, we are still sticking with Barbarian. We now get Feral Instinct, which just gives us advantage on our initiative rolls. This can be helpful for us getting into position early and defend our allies before the enemies even get a chance to attack. Level 7 also gives us Instinctive Pounce, which lets us move up to half our speed with the same bonus action that we use to enter our rage with. So that first turn now gives us 65 feet of movement, or 75 if we're in our large form. It's pretty wild stuff, honestly. Taking our 8th level in Barbarian gives us another feat, and this time we are picking Great Weapon Master. There was a lot of disappointment when we found out that the -5 plus 10 feats were going away, but I think both this one and Sharpshooter did quite well for themselves. Great Weapon Master gives us +1 strength, so we are now at 19, but it also gives us Heavy Weapon Mastery, which means that whenever we hit a creature with a heavy weapon as part of the attack action on our turn, we can cause that weapon to deal extra damage equal to our proficiency bonus, which right now is sitting at a +3. We are using a halberd, so we qualify, but also this will be able to activate on every one of our attacks so far. The main attack, our cleave attack, and our extra attack are all tied to the attack action, so this will be a solid and consistent damage buff on each successive hit that we're able to make. Finally, it also gives us the potential for a bonus action attack if we reduce a target to 0 hit points or if we critically hit. This doesn't proc Great Weapon Master, but that's still fine since it's just more opportunities for us to topple with our maul or slow with some other effects. Speaking of which, at level 9 we now get Brutal Strike, which is the greatly appreciated upgraded form of the old Brutal Critical feature. Brutal Strike lets us, if we use Reckless Attack, to forego any advantage on one strength-based attack roll of our choice on our turn, provided that the attack roll doesn't already have disadvantage. If the attack hits, the target takes an extra 1d10 damage, and we can apply one of two effects. Forceful Blow, which pushes the target 15 feet, or Hamstring Blow, which reduces the target's speed by 10 feet. I bet you can guess which one we're going to be using most of the time. So now, between our Frost Giant Ancestry, the Slasher Feat, the Topple Mastery, and Hamstring Blow, we have a ton of consistent ways to reduce the speed of any of the enemies in our spinning whirlwind of death. It is also worth mentioning though that Forceful Blow can also be incredibly useful if an ally has something like Spike Growth down near us, but we obviously can't guarantee that. At level 9, our rage damage also goes to +3 and our proficiency bonus hits +4. This now brings us to our next damage report. Combat still largely looks the same for us in terms of what we're doing. We're closing any gaps to enemies with our movement, we're using our reaction to summon as many targets towards us as possible, and then cleaving and toppling as necessary. At this point, it's also quite possible that we could even have as many as 3 or more enemies near us, but that's not going to change much for our calculation. We are going to assume 2 creatures and that we are using everything available to us, which is still fairly sustainable by this point. We're now dealing an average damage of 70 across an AC of 10 or 74 with advantage, and 51 against an AC of 16 or 67 with advantage. This is using our 1d6 cold damage from our ancestry and assuming that we get to trigger our bonus action attack. But even factoring out that bonus action attack, we're still sitting at 54 and 43, which is fairly respectable and nearly double the damage output of our last report. Great Weapon Master here and Rage are combining to do work. Moving on to level 10, we are going to take our final level in Barbarian. Here we get another Weapon Mastery, and again, it really does not matter what you pick here, so just go with your favorite. Way more importantly though, at level 10, we also get Battering Roots, which is just so sick. During our turn, Battering Roots extends the reach of any of our heavy or versatile weapons by an additional 10 feet. Our halberd is already a reach weapon, so this means that our reach with it now becomes 20 feet. Just in case we weren't able to slow our target speed by quite enough, they really aren't going anywhere now. It's worth mentioning that this is only on our turn, so if we do happen to make an opportunity attack, it does go back to 10 feet. But we're not done. Battering Roots also lets us activate the Push or Topple mastery in addition to a different mastery property that we're already using. So now we can cleave and topple all with our halberd on every attack. I mean, cleave is still limited to once per turn, but again, this can combo with push in case one of our allies is creating some dangerous area of effect around us. At level 11, we are finally going to take our first trip out of Barbarian and dip into Fighter. Our first level in Fighter gives us a fighting style, and there's two reasonable choices here. We can go with Great Weapon Fighting, which just makes it so that if we roll a 1 or 2 on the damage die of any of our weapons, we can treat it as if it rolled a 3. This is fine. It's not that much of a meaningful difference, so I think the better option to go with here, given our role as a tank, is to take Defense to boost our AC up by 1. This will put our armor class up to 17 or possibly 18 or even higher depending on what armor we've managed to obtain by this point and whether or not it's magical. Also at Fighter 1, we get Second Wind, which is a great option to have on a tank as well. It lets us use our bonus action to restore hit points equal to 1d10 plus our fighter level, and we get to regain 1 use of it on a short rest and all of them on a long rest. Initially, we have 2 uses of it, but this also increases as we take more levels in Fighter. Finally, and still at level 1, we get even more weapon masteries. 3 more actually. This hasn't mattered for like the last 2, and it matters even less now. Just take whatever you want. At level 12, we're going Fighter 2, which gives us one of my favorite features of the game, despite how just boring it is. I just love it. Action Surge. This gives us another action on our turn, which basically lets us do everything twice. Granted, no, it doesn't let us cleave again since it is limited to once per turn, and we have the same limitation for Brutal Strike, but we do get 2 more chances to apply Topple if we wanted to, and just more hits in general, which is always good. Fighter 2 also gives us Tactical Mind, which is another out of combat ability. It lets us use our second wind die when we fail an ability check to roll it and add it to the total, potentially turning a failure into a success. This also combos nicely with Primal Knowledge by letting us use an ability score that we're better off in and getting to potentially add a healthy bonus to it. And if it still fails, we don't burn our second wind use. It's pretty good. At level 13, we are going Fighter 3, which also gives us our subclass. We're going to be stepping into the Battle Master here. Battle Masters get to activate a set of maneuvers, which can make them potentially much more potent during combat. To use these maneuvers, we need to spend one of our superiority dice. We begin with 4 of them, and they're all d8s. We also regain all of our superiority dice on a short or long rest. At Fighter 3, we get to pick 3 maneuvers from the list, so we're going to be going with Sweeping Attack, Evasive Footwork, and Lunging Attack. Sweeping Attack gives us yet another damage option for when we have multiple enemies in close proximity to each other, which again, between branches, battering roots, and our plethora of ways of toppling or slowing enemies, shouldn't be all that hard to accomplish. It's also worth mentioning that, at least by my interpretation, this does not work with Great Weapon Master, since I'm pretty sure the keyword hit in the description of the feat signifies the actual action of rolling to hit the creature, which we are not doing with Sweeping Attack. I also don't believe that it would, as written at least, activate our bonus on rage damage, but I can totally see an argument for either of these working as well, so I think this is going to be one of those ask your DM and your mileage may vary kind of situations. For the purposes of our math, I'm going to be assuming that Sweeping Attack does not proc either Great Weapon Master or rage damage. Evasive Footwork is now just a fantastic defensive option, and especially one to be used if we're surrounded by many enemies. It lets us use a superiority die and take the disengage action. We then roll that die and add it to our AC, which now lasts until the start of our next turn. This can easily pump our armor class into the mid to high 20s and can absolutely be worth using over a potential bonus action attack, depending on how many enemies are around us, so it would kind of be a situational call. Lastly, Lunging Attack just lets us add our superiority die to the damage roll of an attack if we moved at least 5 feet toward the target prior to attacking them. This might work if we happen to be chasing anyone down or maybe on the first round of combat, but it's probably rarely going to be used. So you can also swap this one out for one of your favorites. Now at level 13, we are Barbarian 10, Fighter 3, and it's time for another damage report. Everything about our combat strategy here remains the same, except now our reach is incredibly long and we can potentially topple on every attack, which is crazy. All of our other assumptions hold true, and we are also going to assume that we are using Sweeping Attack once per round as well. This now means that we will deal an average of 77 DPR against an AC of 10, or 81 with advantage, and 58 against an AC of 17, or 76 with advantage. We're not setting world records for damage here, but that's not the point either. The damage is certainly above average for this level, which is worth mentioning, but the amount of control that we're able to exert on our enemies, which will then subsequently allow our allies to just pile on the pain without necessarily needing to worry as much about defending themselves, also speaks volumes about this build. As much damage as we're putting out, we are allowing our allies to put out even more. At level 14, we are Fighter 4 and we get another Weapon Mastery, and surprise, surprise, it still doesn't matter. But at Fighter 4, we also get another feat, and we're going to be picking Polearm Master. This will finally bump our strength score up to 20 for that +5, which is very nice. It also provides us with 2 other benefits. Pole Strike gives us a bonus action attack if we use the attack action to attack with a weapon that has the heavy and reach properties, which our halberd does. Now, the weapon damage for the bonus action attack is a D4, which is obviously less than our D10, but this is a guaranteed bonus action, which isn't so bad. With Great Weapon Master, our bonus action attack was gated behind scoring a critical hit or reducing a target to 0, so this is much more reliable than that, but comes with the downside of being less effective. Given how frequently we are going to be attacking though, and with how many of those attacks are going to be with advantage, we'll likely be able to activate our Great Weapon Master attacks often enough. But this is just nice to have in our back pocket in case we need it. This feat also gives us Reactive Strike, which lets us take a reaction to make a melee attack when a creature enters our reach. This will very rarely get used. Firstly, we should remember that our reach when it isn't our turn is 10 feet, not 20. But again, our reaction is likely going to be spoken for on most turns. If it happens to be free though, this is a nice potential bonus. At level 15, we're going to take our second multi-class dip, this time into Ranger. A lot of what we get as a first level Ranger just isn't all that useful to us. We get spell casting, which can potentially be useful outside of combat, but given that we can't cast or concentrate on spells while raging, this essentially serves no combat purpose for us. Favorite enemy just gives us Hunter's Mark, so again, we can't really do anything with that, and we get another Weapon Mastery. Hooray! At level 16, we are Ranger 2 and we get Deft Explorer, which is just a nice addition to our growing arsenal of out-of-combat utility. We learn 2 more languages and gain an expertise. I picked Athletics, but Insight is always a great option too. We also get another fighting style here, so I would just pick up whichever one you didn't get from the fighter, so either defense or great weapon fighting. At level 17, we are Ranger 3, and we get our subclass. So for this, we're going to be choosing Hunter, specifically for the Hunter's Prey option, which lets us choose every day now between Colossus Slayer and Horde Breaker. The obvious choice for us here, and basically every day, is Horde Breaker. Horde Breaker lets us, once per turn, if we make an attack with a weapon, to make another attack with the same weapon against a different creature within 5 feet of the original target, provided they are also within our weapon's reach, which is very likely, but it does also have the caveat that we can't have attacked them yet this turn. So, what this means for us is that we will always need to make sure that we are activating our Horde Breaker feature first, before our Cleave Mastery. As far as I can tell, there is nothing restricting when we can activate Horde Breaker versus our Mastery property. Things that require immediate action after the attack typically say so, like we saw in Polearm Master. The Weapon Masteries don't have that restriction anywhere, so we're essentially good to go, and this just gives us another attack and also activates Great Weapon Master. At level 17, we are now Barbarian 10, Fighter 4, Ranger 3, and it's time for yet another and our final damage report. Again, our combat strategy is solidly in place here. Nothing is changing, except now we just have a few extra tools at our disposal. We have the guaranteed bonus action attack whenever necessary through Polearm Master, but we've also got a potential slight damage increase through Great Weapon Fighting, but most importantly, we also have an extra attack through Horde Breaker, which is yet another opportunity to slow, topple, or whatever else, and benefits from Great Weapon Master and rage damage. All our assumptions from earlier are also staying the same. 2 enemies within range, we make 1 attack, activate Horde Breaker, activate Cleave, then extra attack with a potential bonus action attack through Great Weapon Master or a guaranteed one through Polearm Master. Every one of these attacks, except for our bonus action attack, benefits from Great Weapon Master, so that's 4 out of 5, which is pretty damn good. One of our attacks we're going to be using Brutal Strike, another one we can use Sweeping Attack, and another one we can use our cold damage from our Ancestry, and on any or all of these, we can also potentially topple or slow. What all this adds up to is an average DPR of 107 against an AC of 10 or 114 with advantage, and 84 against an AC of 18 or 105 with advantage. That's not too shabby at all, considering our primary goal here is to function as a taunt. So, final thoughts. This build just feels like a lot of fun and is way more versatile and powerful than I expected it to be. I didn't actually expect the damage output to climb nearly as high as it did. And sure, you could maybe argue that there's a bit too much optimism going on here, but I'm not so sure. If we're doing our job as a tank, being able to reliably have 2 targets within our 20-foot attack reach does not seem like that big of a stretch to me. Especially considering that on the first turn, if we successfully pull them, they just can't move anymore. Then with all the slow effects and possibilities to knock them prone, they really are not going anywhere. By the time we're level 17, those enemies will be competing against a DC 19 strength save, which is pretty respectable in its own right, but also doesn't factor in the fact that, kinda like I mentioned earlier, that our allies should be feeling so much less stress and can be slamming our opponents with debuffs to make it even more likely that they fail, or to slow them as well, or just pile on more damage. There's so many combinations of things that you can accomplish with this build, especially if you have a cooperative party, and I think it just brings so much fun to the table. So that's it, that's all I got. I don't really do build videos all that often, and now I remember partly why, just because they take so much time to prepare, it's crazy. But if you enjoy this, let me know what you think in the comments below, and if you have any other build suggestions, I'll gladly take a look there too. If people like this type of thing, I might try and do more of it. Thanks so much for taking the time to watch this video, I do sincerely appreciate it. Check out some of my other D&D content, subscribe to help me hit 10K, I would really appreciate it, and otherwise, take care.